I have no choice. What I'm saying? No. Don't start this shit yet. No. Go ahead. I know I have to.
In 10. So, go.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here as we do our follow-up session on Panel Live, the Salinas version, on the heels of the Salinas Juneteenth celebration. I wanted to give a shout out and thanks to Wave Street Studio and the Wave Street crew. I want to thank Dynamic Dane for being an organizer of this, as well as Ms. Michaela Miller. So some of us who were here in the beginning stages of this, just want to thank you all, and here we are at the second episode. This afternoon, we're going to be talking with our allies here in the city of Salinas, and I've got one dynamite crew here. I will just do a little brief introduction, and then I'll let them share a little bit more about themselves. So to my right here, I have Ms. Devon McCauley, who started out as a volunteer with Salinas Juneteenth year before last, and is now one of our committee members, has been really helpful with the website and social media, and our volunteer coordinator. To her right, we have community enthusiast Wes White. A lot of people have seen him behind the camera. He has a YouTube, John Doe.
13K.
Yes, and he'll be telling you more about his activism. He also was a mayoral candidate for the city of Salinas. Thank you, Wes, for being here. Yep. And we have Xago, community activist, founder and playwright of Bakhtun 12, also doing some grassroots work with Monterey County Black and Brown Coalition, as well as Building Healthy Communities. So without further ado, you all know me. I'm Asya Guillory. I was on the last session. Salinas resident. I hold space in Chinatown, doing pop-up healing, also a therapist in training, and just glad to be here to facilitate this conversation. So go ahead, Devon, if you want to just introduce yourself, tell us your Salinas story.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I've lived in Salinas for about 20 years now. I'm originally from Massachusetts. I lived in San Francisco for 4 years when I was a teenager, and but I ended up settling in Salinas, and I was a stay-at-home mom there for 10 years. I worked in construction for 5 years, and the pandemic afforded me the opportunity to complete my degree. So I finished my degree in social and behavioral sciences last year. And now I work as a housing navigator, helping individuals with psychiatric disabilities find and retain stable housing.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very awesome. So I'm a fourth generation Salinian. My great grandma actually came from Watsonville. I went to Salinas High when it first opened in 1920, or graduated that year as a senior. So got pretty deep roots there. I grew up, my dad was in the Navy, so I was born in Virginia, grew up in Guam and Hawaii, so I didn't actually come to the States until I was 11. Found it very different between an island lifestyle and what the culture of the United States says it's going to be. So I might be going a little too deep already, but
we're going to get in the weeds.
Let's
dive.
There's a lot of love here too, you know, coming back. So I appreciate everyone, you know, the community that's been around this. That's what I really love about it.
Born and raised on the east side of Salinas, and was fortunate enough to make our way back. I'm a community storyteller, Chicano theater artist, and Hartnell College ethnic studies adjunct instructor. But the full time right now is building healthy communities, neighborhood organizer, focusing around resident voice, resident power, and really taking like as much of a hands-on approach to what it means to be a resident in Salinas, you know. I think a lot of folks, I think we all have our own experiences of what belonging is and what it means to belong to a community. And that's, you know, it's all related back to why it's important to celebrate Juneteenth. And so, yeah, I'm excited to be here, Miss Asya.
Yes. Well, what's interesting, some of us are transplants, but we all kind of ended up in Salinas. So the irony is I'm originally from Oakland, California, but moved here. And Xago did work in Oakland, California, even though he was born and bred here. So we leave and then we come back. We bring those experiences from whence we came, and we plant seeds, whether we know it or not. So if you all could talk about how you got involved with the Salinas Juneteenth celebration.
Yeah, and you know touched on it earlier. I was at CSUMB. I saw a notice for a call for volunteers, and I responded, said, "Yeah, like sign me up. I'd love to help out that day." And helped out that first day in 2022. And at the end of the day, Miss Asia is like,
We didn't scare her away.
"You're going to join." I don't think you asked me. Said you're going to join the committee. And so I was like, well, I'd be honored to join the committee. So I have worked for the last year helping out with logistics and administrative stuff and really, providing support to the committee.
We're glad to have you. Go ahead, Wes.
Very cool. So I do a YouTube channel, John Doe 13K on YouTube. And I've been doing that since 2014-15. And for that, I just follow anything. If it's public, I will be there. And especially to support its community, anything affluent, positive, civic, social, environmental justice oriented. So you're talking like Black Lives Matter era. And we went to every single protest there was for that. Me and my bro Dred, Dred
Rest in
McCauley,
power.
he was just a real down dude. And that's probably one big way, right? Just pulling in, but just following everything. I think the fairgrounds might have been the first one.
At the rodeo, you were filming our
Yeah.
very first inaugural,
Right.
Juneteenth.
Yeah, so I try to follow, anytime, every time, especially Salinas centric if I can help it. So it was beautiful. Thanks for coming on the stage.
Where do we start?
I know. He's
Black and
trying
brown
to put these
collision.
dots together. Go ahead.
There are a couple of different on-ramps, The big one was 2020, though. I think, it put us on this path. I think it was a big redirection for a lot of us. For the folks here in the audience, being witness and being, present with what happened around here, I feel what has resulted from that summer is, our marching orders to continue building and sustaining the bridges, amongst our communities, different communities. And Juneteenth has been a big bridge building type of event, I feel like we, officially got on like last year, 2022, bringing in the voter registration efforts that we were doing with with the Monterey County Black and Brown Solidarity Coalition, when we had organized the big march from East Side to Seaside.
Yep.
I feel is something that can that memory can inspire us, and I'm so blessed and grateful to have had that experience with yourself,
proud
our
moment.
folks here, right? And knowing that there is a responsibility to keep that alive, and being able to participate at the Juneteenth this year and last year, it's been an honor and a privilege.
And I want to just, highlight 2020 was the highlight of, we had the killing of George Floyd, we had the execution of Breonna Taylor, and it was this large Black Lives Matter, international Black Lives Matter movement kind of call to action, just to, so everyone's clear on what you mean. We ain't talking about the COVID, we talking about what was happening nationally with Black lives. And a lot of different, I think, folks started and wanted to get involved in some way, shape, or capacity. And I think it's important for us to talk about how allies, like since you bring that up, how did allies respond and how did you engage with community, if you all want to share?
Well, I just jumped out there. I mean, if there's people in public, then you know, I'm going to those events and people are talking. I capture the entire conversation, so the depth of the content, especially in front of newspaper or news camera interviews, you know, because usually you only get a soundbite, maybe a sentence. But I'm able to hold a lot more context that way and make new friends, I guess, new relations, and then, you know, we end up talking and be like, oh, have you heard of these folks? You know, you should meet these guys. You know, and that's been a real positive experience like that.
Because there were three protests that I was aware of that took place in Salinas, right? There was one at Central Park, there was one at Hartnell, and then there was the one at the Rodeo. So I think there were people that I had never engaged with who were residents of Salinas. They're like, I want to do something about this, and it sparked it.
Smaller
Go ahead.
ones too, because I
You think it
remember-
was some more?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
well, one of the first ones I went to, we were just on the corner of
South Main?
and and Blanco.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a little one, right? But there was some serious energy there, and I think that was the first one maybe that I went to. And then we branched out to Marina, and then I met you in Seaside. Yeah.
What was happening at CSUMB? You were a student
wasn't
wrapping
there
up the
yet.
degree. Oh, you
I
weren't
wasn't
there,
yet.
at that time?
No,
Okay.
I was just staying at home with my kids. I was laid off from my job. I was staying at home with my kids, and this was all happening. And I was like, this for me. There's a reason that I have this free time right now, and this is what the free time is for.
Yeah.
And so I did. I just put a lot of focus into that, into making my signs and putting my mask on and being at those marches.
So talk a little bit more. We'll just segue into what it means to be an ally. So you put your mask on, you got your signs.
Yeah.
How did you show up? How were you aware? And how did you kind of feel like, okay, here I am, Devon, showing up as how I look?
Yeah, well,
How did that
exactly.
work?
And I think the first thing I would say is that I would and will never self-identify as an ally. I don't think it's appropriate for me to state, that I'm here for you, because at any moment, if I make the choice to turn, it changes everything, and so I would never presume to call myself an ally. It is one of the greatest honors of my life to be invited to this stage as one, to be recognized as one at the same time. When I would show up, I tend to be someone who is less in the networking and more in just like, I'm back here holding the sign, I'm shouting, I'm chanting, but I have a little more social anxiety than that. So I'm just there, with my boots on and marching and just finding, where can I be another body? Where can I be, another set of hands, another set of feet, another voice in the crowd, just adding my voice to that crowd. And that's kind of where my activism shows up in public.
You mentioned the one in front of Star Market. You remember that guy that was waving the flag coming down the street?
Yeah.
And I feel like that was a great ally role for me, I guess, at that point, because just having it on camera, I think belayed it. And then Rigo was there too, another ally. He totally talked him down or whatever, and de-escalated the situation, and I thought that was a kind of a serious moment, actually.
Yeah.
It seemed like it could have turned really violent.
Yeah. And I think you identify a really good place for people that look like us. We are uniquely empowered with the ability to de-escalate situations in ways that other people are not. And when we do come into that situation and we kind of, hold people by the hand, as much as we might detest that, we do have that ability to do that. And I do think that is absolutely a responsibility on our part.
We also, when we did the East Side to Seaside, you remember the Batman dude?
With the one in the van?
Yes, who was kind of like not quite trailing us, but kind of trailing us.
Trailing us, yeah.
Yes. you want
Then-
to share? That just triggered me a little bit when you said that, because I remember that dude was a little creepy.
Yeah,
So-
he followed us up. Blanco, for those who don't know, Blanco was that one main artery that connects us into the peninsula. It crosses over to crosses the Salinas River, and that route was, it was our one route to to Seaside. All the other routes were highway type of routes, and that route was after meeting with the police
Transportation
departments,
city. Oh, yeah.
transportation, and the sheriffs. They were they did their best to recommend other routes and whatnot. Hey, why don't you just park it there and then go on to. And everybody was on board. Everybody knew, no, this is what we're doing. And there was an unknown piece to it, right? There's that unknown piece to the fact that, when was the last time, people marched out of there, and so that responsibility of their safety, it just weighs in on you because it's like if something happens. You got to be ready to take that responsibility. And when you saw that van with, dude, you're only thinking the worst, because, you don't know what's in the van, right? And he's making these stops, and he's just projecting whatever he's projecting. And you don't know about our folks, too. We don't know what it means for them. We don't know if they're, how they're feeling. If something might be triggered amongst them, that they may feel or may need some type of other space to be put in, or to jump into a safer space, right? Because we're out there, we were all marching on that road.
All we had was the lettuce, though. That was all.
That was it. All we had was the lettuce,
All we had was the lettuce.
and the workers that were out there.
And the
They were
workers.
out there cheering us on. But there were those moments where homeboy was a little too, was just creepy.
So we have those situations. Xago, just to follow up, so as an ally who's a person of color for Black, right, given what had happened with George Floyd, how do you show up, or how would you define the role of an ally as also identifying as a person of color?
That was, we have a history, there's a deep history, and then being of Mexican descent, that history has European and African seeds, and that's something that the Mexican community or those of Mexican descent, those of Latin American descent, throughout all of Latin America, there is a strong African root, and so it forces you to have to trace back what this history, how this history started, and it started through colonization, and to have to understand what's our connection, it's there. The indigenous nation of what we know and identify as Mexico suffered a loss of about 24 million people, the first 100 years of that, of 100 or so years of colonization, and so by the 1500s into the 1600s, it became part of their function, the colonizers' function, to enslave people from Africa and bring them to New Spain, right?
Millions, yep.
Because the indigenous population was almost nearly wiped out. And so, do the math, and understand, if we had an enslaved population and a population that was being displaced, the indigenous population that was being displaced, disempowered, you got to imagine what those scenarios were like, people resisted, and in that resistance, people got together and made families, right? And
lot of
so,
blending.
how do you, like understanding? Well, then, wow, how easy must that be, if you witness how a lot of our mixed, like, families are today. If it's tough for them today, imagine what it was like back in the late 1500s and the 1600s. So you have to do all this deep.
Give it a history lesson, you'll be quizzed. The audience members will be a quiz. But no, it's important to understand that. Yeah.
And overall, it's like you come to this point, come to 2020, and you're like, oh wow, we've all been struggling to achieve whiteness.
And put that in the context of the city of Salinas, given the demographics, given the working class, given the lettuce curtain, the billion-dollar ag industry, given the history that we've been trying to amplify of a Black legacy being there too, the Okies coming, like how does that make sense present day when we say ally?
When we say ally, you're like, what? Why is what's happening to George Floyd? Why is what happened to Breonna Taylor? Why is what happened to Oscar Grant? Why is what happened to Trayvon? Why is what happened? Why is it that And why? Why? Right? I mean, we've been here before, right? I remember the '90s, right? Like '91, '92. What happened to Rodney King?
On TV.
And the idea that, well, someone was able to capture that on video, and it's like now it's like it's an overwhelming amount of of these crimes that are captured on video that we have enough evidence to see how anti-Black, how anti-indigenous the systems are.
Anti-BIPOC, Black,
Anti-BIPOC.
indigenous, people of color. Yeah. So I will shift gear. We in the weeds is getting good. So Devon, as a mom, I'm assuming your children are of same heritage. Like what is your role as a parent when we hear what Xago's saying and knowing that you're a single mom here in Salinas, I'm a single mom here in Salinas. What responsibilities do you have as an ally to impart within your children to have these kind of conversations and how they show up?
Yeah, and I mean, I think a good example is, Black parents have to have a very specific conversation with their children, with their boys and with their girls. And for me, I also feel I have a responsibility to have a specific conversation with my kids in that you're never responsible for anyone else's behavior, but you are responsible for the situations that you create. And if you create a situation that puts one of your friends in danger, that danger is going to be worse for them than it is for you. And so it is always on you to be creating safe situations and safe spaces for your friends. And so as a mom, that's the biggest thing. That's always been the biggest conversation for me.
How is it received?
Very well.
They receive it very well?
Yes, they understand.
Okay.
They get it.
They get it?
They get it, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Wes, you have been an advocate for a lot of unhoused folks in Salinas for many years. I don't know, probably over a decade from what I understand. You talked about Brother Dredd. He's just one story of many disenfranchised folks. And you show up at city council, you're filming the sweeps. How do you show up as an ally? And what kind of conversations do you have with other folks who, may not have the same passion about the unhoused?
Gosh.
Wes
famous
throws
for
down.
infamy.
I've seen it live.
Better be careful. That's just it. I mean, you give any demographic, and you're going to find someone landless, unhoused, that lives outside. They're just too poor to afford rent, and that's all wealth inequality in the end. I'm part of this Poor People's Campaign, so that is kind of what I will try to redirect people toward is the Poor People's Campaign. It's a national call for moral revival.
Yes, Reverend William Barker.
So there's a national union of the homeless that it's under, and so that's kind of what I'm a part of actually. So like in 2016 or 2015, I got tapped of like, hey, you guys are fighting this ordinance and we got a lawsuit going. Can you start a union for us? But you have to do it on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And that was the deal. And I was like, okay. a white guy, but you know, I mean, they looked past that, and that was awesome. And so now we got like 27 chapters around the state.
Okay.
You know, we got 20 chapters, 20 states that have chapters. And we're trying to revive it. It's National Union of Homeless was actually in the 90s, and took over a few houses for a while, which was pretty awesome. And it's just almost like you know, you're only going to get what you're organized to take, and that's a very powerful, you know, mantra about it is organize, organize, organize. And that's the kind of stuff I guess I'd try to preach if I was doing such a thing.
But you know, you show up to local government, you show up to city council, you show up to the land use meetings, but then I understand that you also show up to court with folks. You've been working with the one gentleman, am I going to forget his, David, down in Chinatown. I know Xago also was working with you all on specific cases. So, you know, when you show up and how you show up, I think makes a difference, because you have to get folks to trust you, right? And you got to get folks to want to allow you to advocate for them in ways that they may not be able to, whether it's mentally, physically, legally. So you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, well, okay, so yeah, Closer Walk has an attorney who's also a pastor, and so he's on a real great path. I appreciate him. I missed the other part, but so for doing all these interviews and stuff, you know,
and going to Sacramento too. You went to Sacramento. You've taken unhoused folks with you to these meetings, and go ahead.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, but
I know
I find them.
you
I
do
find
some of
them.
what you're
You know,
doing.
like I connect them. The only thing I really do is like the networking part, right? You need this one that. You know, Cecil would be a good fit for you. CSU and BHA or interim, or you know, you should try these other numbers. And you know, that's the path to housing. So it's all in the, you know, the chorus of the services are going to work for you. So get in line, and the more that you are known, the easier it is to sell yourself in this culture, and hopefully get, you know, the help you need, not just what's being provided or offered or paid for. That certainly doesn't bridge the last mile, and for seeing all those last miles get cut. I mean, it's not just falling through the cracks, it's pushing you in the cracks. And, you know, I just see that on a daily basis. And sure, I started out just worrying about nickels and dimes, you know, of how they spend in the budget and stuff. But you start realizing everything the numbers are what we want to show you, you know, and so it just becomes, you know, like, okay, but then when that storage of personal property on city property ordinance came about, it's like, okay, prick me for a nickel, prick me for a dime, but when you start doing that to people directly, man, I got to get in front of that. And that's a big allyship right there in itself.
Taking folks' vehicles and RVs and not letting them get their belongings out, and just like systematically.
It seems like an industry, you know, of profitability, lucrative.
So you said the B word, and I want to allow Devon. Devon is also working, you said, with interim.
Yes.
I know it's still new, but you too have had your share with some of these bureaucracies. If you want to have a chance to share about that, and then we'll definitely let this gentleman talk about Salinas budget.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, I mean, so it is, so my position is new, and so we're definitely still in the honeymoon phase. And we are seeing, I think, probably record funding right now. My position is new funding, and we've kind of had a lot open up recently. And interestingly, what I'm finding at work is that there is a ton of money for me to throw at people, and there is not a single landlord who will take it. And so it is less a situation of that I personally am seeing of bureaucratic issues than it is the social disease of hatred of the homeless.
Would you say there's some prejudiceness, or would you say there's some
Absolutely.
racism? Would you how?
Oh, certainly. I mean, it's when it comes to the haves, it's almost as if poverty feels contagious to a lot of people, I think. And I think the further you are away from poverty, the more contagious it feels. And when you add on top of that, or maybe not adding on top of that, but I think when you are afflicted with that, outlook, perception, I think that you also are very likely to be xenophobic, to be racist. And so adding on top of that, you know, you might find, oh, maybe our company can, you know, devote a little bit of money to this organization that's got a bunch of white board members and, you know, is very traditional, perhaps.
Homogenous.
Homogenous, yes.
I use that word.
So yeah, I think it is racism, but I think it is mostly that absolute fear of their failure at capitalism.
Budget, Salinas City budget.
I mean, it's, you know, in talking about how residents, you know, all have a role, right, in our city structures,
Housed
you know,
or unhoused.
housed or unhoused, you know. I mean, you know, how does it show up, you know, and what work do residents have to do if they're gonna remind us, if they're gonna take their time to say, well, you all are all the boss, and you know, oh, that sounds great. Do they say that to make us feel good, or do they say that to make us feel like, oh, wait a minute, you mean I gotta manage you? You mean I gotta call you up and make sure that this pothole right over here is filled, or that this sidewalk is fixed because the señora right next door had she just fell the other day, right? Like, but she had nobody to call, or nobody to talk to, right? Like all of these the built environment itself, just the built environment itself, you know, for some folks, oh, I just punctured my tire. Okay, I'm gonna call in. I'm late to work, right? You know, I'm gonna get somebody to replace it, and then okay, I might lose a few hours of work. For a lot of our neighbors, a good majority of them, monolingual Spanish speakers, farm workers, you know, sustaining our part in the global food chain, you know, like that punctured tire, or you know, or that slip and that fall, you know, that disruption could just throw them all off, and we don't even know if they could. And it could be, you know, there could be mom and dad at home, or it could, a lot of times, just mom. You know, and so there is no consideration for that type of reality that a lot of our neighbors live in. So in terms of budgets, like, do these budgets really actually represent, you know, the priorities of the community, when the majority of the budgets that are presented go to law enforcement?
Yes, they
You
do.
know, and then we look at community development, you know, parks and rec, you know, public works, and we're like looking at, oh wow, it's 43% here, but it's 10%, 9%, you know, maybe, you know, 12, 13% over here, right? And you're hearing the narrative being facilitated by our electeds that, you know, it's, you know, this department runs 24 hours a day, you know, all the other departments run 8 hours a day. And then you're like, okay, well then, shouldn't the other departments get at least a third of what this department's getting? Because it doesn't look like that, you know. And so when working with our residents this past year, you know, they were engaging with their city council members. You know, we had met with each city council member from each district once, at least once. We had met with 4 of them at least twice, right? After they got a chance to see that draft, right? The draft of the budget. You know, they share a draft before they pass it, right? Like a month before it gets passed. And then all the residents were like, oh, okay, oh, well, here's maybe 1% put over here. There's a couple of percentage, a couple of bucks moved around here or there, but, you know, to them, like, to my neighbors, who, you know, who know what,
How to stretch a dollar.
how to stretch a dollar, right? Like when they see this budget and they're thinking like, wait a minute, I've been going to all of these engagement meetings. I've been participating in all your forums, You know, I took time, you know, away from, you know, my evening with my kids, you know, like, you know, and because I guess because they were told their voices matter, because they were told, like, you know, this is their city, regardless of being documented or not. And they were like saying, like, wait a minute, if we tripled the participation, because it was tripled this year, in the past it was like 1,000, 1,300. This year it went up to like 4,000 something, like, you know.
Okay.
It tripled, like, the participation of residents in the budget process. And they were like, but why does it look like last year?
It's the same budget.
It looks like last year, like, you know, and I'm there, like, I'm just kind of like, well, you know, I'm like, well, you know, you gotta, and I'm like, wait a minute, why am I doing the electeds' work for them? I'm not gonna explain to them. Let's bring the electeds here, and let's bring our residents over here, and let's let them, you know, communicate and help them, you know, hear from our electeds, you know, why they see what they see. Don't tell me 4 is a 3 when it's a 4, right? Like, don't tell me the sky is red when I know it's blue, right?
Exactly.
So this is just 1 year, right? And this is just 1 year, one experience. To keep track of money, you know, like, to keep track of our money, we gotta treat it like it's our money.
You gotta treat it like it's in your pocket, yeah. Obviously, you're passionate about that, and thank you for sharing. I want to make sure, well, Devon is also participating in this city process. Wes shows up. Civic engagement is a big deal. I want to allow you to share what your experience has been, and then I want to tie this back, as we're talking about budget and inequity, back to our Black community and allyship. But this general plan.
Yeah, so the Vision Salinas is the general plan that we're working on, and I think we're expecting it to be completed by early next year. And I would say I had a similar experience in that there was this huge push to really include voices, and I believe those voices were represented to a degree. And then at the same time, I feel like there wasn't necessarily the same effort to bring the draft to those people. And that I see as, you know, I want to be a little bit careful here because I am new to this process and, you know, I don't fully understand it. But my experience was that the involvement of a lot of people, and I mean, we had Triqui translators, you know, and which is amazing. And I said, are we going to have Triqui translators when we bring this back to the community? And they were like, well, no, why? And so that made me uncomfortable. And at the same time, it tracks, you know, it was, here we have this funding, let's do this. And then inevitably, maybe there'll be some of those voices show up in it, but it's still going to be 90% of the people who are traditionally represented in these things, you know. And they aren't going to represent those people. They're going to represent the people that exploit those people.
So, who's not at the table? That's
and to speak to what Devon's talking about, you know, you can notice who's not at the table, but I'm going to believe that those who are working, our electeds, our city staff, they know we know, you know, and I think I'm going to believe that they're not going to see it as business as usual, you know, because again, it's like, are we keeping track? It's part of that work of keeping track of that money, you know, and what does that mean? Are we, you know, in terms of Triqui translation, Mixteco, you know.
And
but what about I just want to say, like our Filipino community, our Vietnamese community, our Black community, like who
Yemen
who's
community.
not
Yeah.
Yemen? who's not at the table and a part of this process, and what work again, going back to ally, this overarching theme of allyship, what is our work to make sure that we don't have a homogenous representation?
I think the issue is a flavor of the week kind of thing, right? I think it's that, Black people had 2020 and 2021. And I think now other people are like, well, we're oppressed too. Okay, we're going to give you 2022 and 2023. And I think those that are actually, responsible for the running of it, the administration of these things, are like, this is all going to blow over, and we're still going to have the ag families breathing down our necks because they want what they want.
But there's this saying, none of us are free if anyone is oppressed, right? So the work is going to be
easier.
I see it.
Oh,
Come
I
on.
get-
Go ahead. Go ahead. Finish your thought, and I'm going to let Wes say something.
It's just easier to feel that when you're the one in the $1 million mansion, And yes, I'm still oppressed, but I'm in a $1 million mansion, so, it's not as bad as it is on the east side. At least I'm not there.
Man, well, I'm constantly trying to push people into maybe sticking and staying where they're at, which has happened a few times. We started a couple of union stronghold chapters that way, and that's. But it's a hard life to live, just doing survival and not business. Because money, you still got to sell yourself, still got to come up with money. So and encouraging people to have that better lifestyle of like having an address, being just monitoring, not having a blanket of trash, being a good steward of the land and earning your right or privilege. And so who's going to be that role model? And then those people do pop up, but like the Sherwood Hall 28, most of them got housed. So now it's like, now we're just back to beating everybody else up.
Yeah.
We did our job. Now we can just, pulverize everything. And it's all ours.
Well, I remember the rodeo, there was a whole encampment, right? A couple weeks before the rodeo, everybody got swept out. That was a practice that they kept doing. I mean, we could get on, homelessness would be a whole nother show, right? Activism and unhoused folks. But I want to bring us back. I'm supposed to be facilitating, y'all still with us.
Please.
How do these challenges with budget, these challenges with poverty, these challenges of what you're saying, like I'm in my mansion, so for the rest of y'all, good luck, good riddance. I think what's missing is that I don't see, going back to what we were saying, the strength, the political strength, the activism with our Black residents in Salinas, a consistent. And I know you had shared a lot with me about Dolores Higgins, may she rest in peace. She had been the first and only Black city councilwoman. You did a play to honor her. She was also doing Juneteenth and other community type organizing events around Black culture. And so I'm like, when we fast forward and we think about the challenges she may have had, right? And then here we are in our third year of Salinas Juneteenth, like what is our work and how do we see Juneteenth playing a role to address these issues, or does Juneteenth have a responsibility? I guess I could even go a few steps back. What responsibility would the group who's organizing Juneteenth and the event have in bringing light to some of these topics? Whoever wants to start.
I think it's needed. Even when I was going to Hartnell, it was UBSA, like United Black Students Association. And so I was actually a part of that club too. So in Metra, you need a presence, and that I think is especially, you have to hold space. You need to in some way, shape, or form, as little as big. It's quality, not quantity, more than anything, and just spending time and inviting others to do it. That was actually, because it's diminished a lot, especially since the fort's gone away. Fort Ord is gone, so now we're the military anchor for that, and so now Seaside's kind of, gone through a major shift of demographics, and so that's again to me it's like presence. You gotta say I'm here and hold a light, for it.
So put a stake in the ground, visibility. Yeah. What about the issues though? Like, our role, we're trying to put on an event and going through, look, budget, right? There's no money for Juneteenth, but there's thousands of dollars for all this other shit that's been going on in Salinas.
The Rodeo air show.
I said shit, I'm sorry. Other events, right? Monster Jam,
City
the whole
sponsor.
place is packed. I'm like, who got Monster Jam money over here? I don't have Monster Jam money, but it's popping, the air show. So not to disclose all that. So how do we, I think this is the struggle in Devon being on the inside, like you've heard some conversations and you've been privy to just how difficult it is to have an event. And when it's black, like I'm gonna just say this, them banners that we paid for was 100 something a pop. But as soon as we put our banners up, did you see them 4th of July banners?
Oh, yeah.
I saw a lot of 4th of July banners. And I'm like, when they bring back 4th of July in Salinas, they got 4th of July money? So, what are your thoughts? Because
Yeah, and I think
think you have insight.
And I think the rodeo actually is a great example because yes, there is
yeehaw.
there's all this money for, forgive me, an event that is symbolic of the exploitation of the people in the land, right? That's what
And the
it
animals.
is. Yeah.
They didn't calf drag.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And at the same time, it is what it is, right? At the same time, Salinas, the foundation of Salinas was built on some prominent black families, which you identified going through this deep dive in the archives for
And he
Salinas
did, too.
Juneteenth.
I gotta
And
give
you
him
did
credit.
this beautiful, historical presentation of photographs and news clippings and personal writings, like really beautiful stuff. And then we see the rodeo, and it's just like whiteness in all its glory, right? Complete black erasure. And so I think that, that's not going away. It's not going away anytime soon. So all we can do is try to supplement it. And I do think that for Salinas Juneteenth, it is our responsibility to provide that supplement.
And grow the energy so you can pass it on.
You know that. I mean, yes. Yes to that, and that historical piece to it. Like, how many of us understand the roots and how the breakdown of how that happened? It was a late message that arrived in Texas, 2 years after the emancipation. And there's an intersection there. Texas is an intersection for a lot of Mexican families, right? And we're because of our education, because of our education, we're not seeing where we're connected, and Texas, how that arrived, how that message arrived, and it says a lot about how we share information today, between communities. There could be one community that gets, they understood, they learned it, and they knew it, and they participate in it, but no one ever bothered, right? Like fill in the blanks, right? That work to understand what Juneteenth is about, is an opportunity, right?
Well, and I'm gonna say it starts with what you shared with me about Barden. That was a slave owner who brought a slave. Well, I'm still trying to track down the man's name, who was a blacksmith that was working in Main Street, Old Town Salinas, right?
Louis Barden.
Louis Barden. So, you talk about that because of our education, because we want to learn more. We go to Historical Society, we look online, we do all of this. But it's that story and you sharing, like knowing that knowledge, and I've lived there for 15 years and had no idea that Barden School. So talk a little bit more about that responsibility.
In the book, African Americans of Monterey County, it was released like back in 2015. It's one of those books that you can find, at like a Long's Drugs or whatever, right?
At the Sepia Tone.
Yeah. But it's one of those books that you can find and easily find or look up. And you take for granted, this looks like some kind of little brochure, local history, right? So one day I picked it up and I was like, oh wow, this person did some research. Because if you look on the website for the Monterey County Historical Society, they're not going to say what James Barden one of the founders of Salinas. They're not going to say that he held Louis Barton for an additional 10 years after the emancipation, right? Which was 1863, right? So by 1873, you know, Louis Barton found out, and he still had to escape.
Hella late, yeah.
Hella late, and he still had to escape, according to the writer Jan Baptiste Atkins, I think it was her name. And he escaped Corralitos, was able to, you know, set up a business there. But you know, you have to use your imagination. So, what happened? Why did it take so long for him to get that information? And then, you know, his struggle of like understanding and learning, like what, you know, like.
And the rage he must have had in that moment.
Because it's, you know, slavery was institutionalized, right? Just like any other institution. So, you know, everything that he just, you know, first off, it's wrong, right? And then, you know, and then second to like understand like, oh, this is over, but it wasn't. And so, what is that? And then what does that say about California? You know, 1850. I think what it was, you know, if we look back, we all can hear, watch all those westerns. You know, the term Wild West comes up, you know, as a way to like really kind of promote this space to. You know, it's part of the gold rush. There's land to claim. There's nobody out here but savage
White
Indians.
vigilantes.
You know, I mean, there's this idea that there's like a scorched earth approach to the West, that they had to come in and do what they did illegally, even under their own laws, right? Captain John C. Fremont, he threw up a flag over there, right on Gavilan Peak, you know, like maybe like a year before it was ever declared, but he threw it up there. He was provoking. They knew what they were doing, you know, and then, you know, to learn how in those first 3 years of California statehood, there is a list of different counties in different areas, different projects that where, you know, the U.S. government had funded the extermination, the removal of Native folks, you know. And so on this list, you see different projects from El Dorado County, Los Angeles, the Gila River near the border with Arizona, where Arizona and California meet. And then at the top of the list, you see two counties. You see Mariposa County, which is kind of an entryway, if y'all know where Yosemite is at.
Yeah.
It's an entryway into the state, right? And you see Monterey County as the two highest paid counties that were shelling out money for scalps. If you had a scalp, you'd get a quarter, 25 cents. If you had a head, if you were able to get decapitated, turn in the head, you got $5. You know, it's there. The information's there, the receipt is there.
Where can they read this or learn this?
That you can find there is, okay, I gotta do my.
We got time, and we could put it on the website. Like
All right, let me get that.
We just want to
So, make sure
you
that
know,
it's
so
there.
if we get any comments, that's not true. How dare he? Scalp my ass.
You can come up with a healthy reading list.
I think
Yeah.
there's so much to unearth here, and I again want to be mindful of time. But you know, I go back to going, you know, the support of the local history, doing that research, and just feeling so invigorated at the same time, but then depressed. Like, imagine what these folks had to go. If I'm cussing and complaining living here in 2023. I don't have a horse, right? I didn't have to go fetch water and all the other things that they had to do, and to just like claim, not, here I am, here we are saying we need more visibility. And imagine what that was like, 1893, right? 1912. So, Jesse Stahl that I put on the Instagram at the rodeo show, he probably performed his ass off, but he's still a black Negro man in the Wild West show. He's all right, you know what I mean? But in researching him, like this man was in New York. This man was all over the state, right? So again, I mean, we're gonna yeehaw and we're gonna celebrate the cowboy culture of our city. Don't leave other people out. And so I think that's the other part where I feel like it's this elbowing that has to happen, where we have space in these narratives.
Especially since that tradition, the cowboy tradition, there were more black cowboys. I mean, that was part of the culture. And still, right? And, as well as the Mexican vaqueros,
The vaqueros, yeah.
But nowhere in our public education have we ever going to get to experience that lesson.
I mean, those of you from the Bay Area, some people came from the Bay, there's a black rodeo show that you can go to, So again, whose culture is it? We're not gonna say, yeehaw. Guillory has a rodeo too. Like, rodeos have been happening. I'm not a rodeo ex. Let me stop talking about the damn rodeo. Can't even go down North Main Street right now. So, I think the history is important. I think the event also sheds light on the need for more history and more of these conversations. And I guess what I want to kind of ease into is, where have we misstepped? Where can we learn when we try to elbow, right, make elbow space and show up? You at the event with your sign, Wes at City Council, like, where are the missteps and where are the learned lessons that we've all had, as showing up as an ally? And we could go back and do some things differently. Any stories you all want to share, or situations you found yourself in? Whoever wants to start.
I think I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think that for me, part of my activism is a very frequent and serious practice of self-reflection, because I am in the process of unlearning the lies of white supremacy and patriarchy that, tried to convince me that, I'm superior to some because of my complexion and I'm inferior to others because of my anatomy, right? And at the same time, that superiority that I am offered in certain situations is dangerous to everyone, right? Like, if I say, so if we're at a protest and I start being antagonistic and I start some shit, I'm not the one in danger, It's you who's going to be in danger. It's Xago who's going to be in danger. Wes and I are going to be fine. The police are going to come and they're going to be like, and they're going to be like, you two, you're coming with us, And so I think one of the most important.
I think that happened a couple.
So yeah, I think for me, it's the lesson I learned is, like, I do the walking, I do the filing, I do the website, I keep my head down and my mouth shut for the most part, and that has been a really important lesson for me, I think.
And I want to say something about that, because there's been many meetings where I'm like, Devon, what do you think? And you're like, I'm not saying anything. Nope, whatever you all decide. And it's like, what? Your ass been here 2 hours too. Don't you have something to say?
There's certain things where it's not my place to speak on. When we're talking about symbolism for the logo, it's not my place to speak on that. I don't have the history. I don't have that struggle.
And let me ask you, and I think Wes may have had some experiences with this idea of the takeover spirit, right? Like, you let one white person in, and then they're going to take the whole,
Yes.
It's a misnomer sometimes, but there are folks, let me just help. Let me just tell you how you guys should be running this because I know best. And
Yes.
So how are you aware of that? And then what is your role with other allies who have the takeover spirit?
Yeah,
I
I'll
guess not
say
just
real
white
quickly.
folks. I could say that I might have that as an ally too. You might show up like that
Well,
as an ally and try to take over. You know.
Certainly. I mean, white supremacy
But y'all do
is
it
a
the
part
most.
of all of us. Like, we all have it, you know? And yeah, so I think that in those moments, you know, I'm always in danger of wanting to take over, which is why I tend to keep my mouth shut. Because oftentimes I find, like, I want to say something, I want to say something, I want to say, and then 2 minutes later, I'm like, I'm really glad I didn't say that. You know, but I do think too, there is a responsibility for us to identify the takeovers and just be like, hey, let's talk. You and I need to have a talk, separate from all of this. And so, yeah, I think that's important.
I was actually thinking about Dredd, you know, because actually one of his main things was he didn't talk. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He just headphones and take pictures and watch out, you know. And for that though, I kind of did, you know, be like, oh, well, he didn't talk, so I'll just, you know, keep on going. So I failed to recognize when there would be parts where he would want to say something, you know. But it's like, you cut me off, so never mind, I don't want to say anything. And so not stepping on him or whatever, you know, I mean, because we were bros, man. We did everything for like 5 years, you know, pretty good mish. Actually, it was pretty awesome. And you know, and try to I'm a teacher, so I'm always trying to include everyone. And, you know, there's 30, 40 kids that aren't going to play together well to begin with, but you still got to get them redirected and focus on finishing. Maybe you can have some fun. And, you know, so I'm always looking out for those underdogs as much as I can. And I'm always realizing, oh yeah, no, there was another opportunity. I could have helped another person do something better and, you know, like bridge that gap. So I'm always looking out for those kind of ways.
Is it uncomfortable to try? I mean, going back to what Devon is saying, it sounds like she's doing her own like personal management.
I'm a giver by nature, maybe too much, but I do like helping. And to exemplify that, I don't charge for anything I do. You know, just try to be supportive. Because, hey, I could be nothing. I could be, you know, an actual negative factor. So, you know, me showing up could be actually a bad thing. You know, when I show up with a camera, a lot of people get more shy and shrivel up. So I'll be like, just turn it out and then let's just have a conversation, you know, because that definitely does make a lot of people uncomfortable.
I think I just real quickly would just say, like, on that, I think a real key for me is to be observant. To just really, you know,
Read the
because I do
room.
have that tendency to just talk. And then I need to be like, okay, yeah.
Xago don't know nothing about taking over, do you?
The biggest lesson I've learned from Black community and Indigenous community in this work, because of that tendency to go in and, oh, there's no, all right, listen. Even the silence will tell you what's up. And that is probably one of the biggest gifts, you know, I've been able to walk away from this struggle, because active listening, let it sit in your body, you know, and let it inform you. The talking, the taking up space, you know, I've tripped, you know, I have tripped. I may continue to trip, you know, and if I can just, you know, just get that forgiveness, work on that forgiveness muscle, for myself, you know, because if we don't have that, forgiveness for ourselves, then, you know, then we're really messed up, right? You know, then we're choosing not to have hope, because the hope is all we got, really. And that bridge building, you know, building, you know, and I say indigenous communities as well, because, you know, our indigenous Oaxaqueño, Guerrero, you know, Southern Mexican, you know, communities that a lot of them are now, we have a big population, big community. and even our indigenous communities that are identify as Californian, you know, like
What about the First Peoples?
the First Peoples, the First Peoples, the Esalen, you know. Also, there's also Rumsen and there's also Amamutsun, you know. We're talking just immediately around here. You know, the danger of being erased, the danger of being invisibilized, you know. That's an ongoing thing, you know. So being really as mindful as possible, you know, and exercising that listen muscle is what's going to get us, is what's going to help us get to where we need to go. But yeah, having that grace, that forgiveness for oneself, man, that's how you got to exercise.
For me, I'll say it's the elders. It's the people who are like 60, 70 years old that will always like sit you down. I wanted to talk just real quick. And then I wanted to go into this double consciousness thing. Like there's this private transcript that you have with your in-group, right? Like, ooh, you know, like we could talk about each other. But then when we do the othering, it's like, oh, these people aren't organized. It's like, but who are you calling unorganized, even though I can't find a pen? It's this double consciousness that happens where it's okay within your group, but we've got this dual role. That's W.E.B. Du Bois, right? Like, I've got this private transcript. You all, with your group, can talk about whatever you talk about. But then when we're in these spaces, right, there's this heightened sensitivity and these things that we turn on. So just, you know, thinking about the listening, I would say time. It takes a long time. And the way that we've been moving, especially planning an event, we started in September and had this idea to do this land acknowledgement, right? So we had been emailing, talked with folks. Here's a beautiful lesson. So I get with Xago to find out the lady's name, and it's escaping me right now.
Louise Miranda Ramirez.
Louise
Miranda
Ramirez, who is up in San Jose and very well known, and it does a lot of work. And it's like, oh, I'm gonna call her and ask her to do a land acknowledgement. And let me tell y'all, I lost my appetite. She set me down. It was like, it's not my responsibility to do the land acknowledgement, right? It's you all's responsibility to do the land acknowledgement. And just thinking like, here we're coming humbly, oh, please do us a rites of passage and honor this land when we're the one having the event. And it was, and how in that moment, it was like, she should be glad. Then it's like, oh, no, she shouldn't, because she gave us this whole lesson. Yeah. And I'm seriously, speakerphone, Dr. Kendra and I are sitting here, and she's like, who called us Esalen? We didn't call ourselves Esalen. Who called us Ohlone? And she's talking about, that's what the Spanish who came in here, and it was like, damn, check, I am officially checked. Who does the land acknowledge? You want to acknowledge the land? You do your homework, right? You take the time to do that. So it was so humbling because I'm like, here, we're trying to be an inclusive, Juneteenth is going to honor. What's your incentive? What is your, it's like, who benefits from you acknowledging the land? Who are you honoring by acknowledging the land? And then there's all these processes that happen with, you know, universities are doing land acknowledgements and whatnot. And it's like, we're really down Black folks who want to acknowledge, you know, indigenous and First Peoples and all this lessons around that. So I think we're about to be up on time, but I want to just give an opportunity for final thoughts on how we can learn together, how we can grow together, not just in allyship, but I'm thinking in terms of, you know, we got this overarching idea of equity and inclusion, right? But what can we all do locally and hold each other accountable to raise awareness? And I think all of us are doing different things in different pockets of the community. But if you want to share with that, and I just want to check how much time do we have, and if there is questions in the audience. Okay, so whoever wants to answer that.
I'll give a slight tidbit, just that, you know, Seaside and Salinas coordinate, and so in that way, hopefully they go back to back and can support each other's events. But, you know, otherwise, I think you folks are growing well, and just reaching out for more folks, constantly advertising, I guess, is you know, maybe a main challenge. And then having students like show up.
Yeah, I think we've seen such a great response for Salinas Juneteenth. You know, we've had great turnout every year. People enjoy the event. People really enjoy the event. And I think, you know, I think it's a great idea for us to look to, you know, other, you know, not necessarily flagship events. I think Salinas Juneteenth is the flagship event, but I think there are other opportunities during the year, you know, that we've kind of talked about this.
We have discussed. Don't spoil it.
I don't want to spoil anything.
Don't spoil it.
But we have discussed some things, and I think it would be great because I think that we could really, I think the entire community benefits if we create this attitude of sustaining, celebrating Black joy and Black excellence. And I think there are just so many opportunities during the year for us to do that.
I think conversations, I think it's really, you know, and I want to again acknowledge Xago. There were several meetings on Zoom, and when you were the birthing of the Monterey County Black and Brown Solidarity, conversations that had never taken place. You know, conversations where guilt comes up, like, well, I really didn't know anything about Black, or there was a Black neighbor I had. I'm reflecting, I never got to know that lady, or, you know, so I think the conversations, making safe spaces, and I think we all have there's no excuse with the internet, the dangerous, crazy place called the internet, and also, you know, old school learning. They're trying to unawaken people in certain states, but like you're responsible for your own awareness and awakeness. But close it out, Xago. What are your thoughts?
You know, our mixed families, you know, a lot of times our mixed families, you know, we don't know how to take into account all the mixed families that, you know, have our Black Mexican, Black Filipino, Black, you know, white, you know, and we're seeing in our school systems right now, like, how there's an erasure taking place. They're not being accounted for, you know, that identity. And so if it's not marked on the paper, then it's not seen in the numbers. And therefore, you know, it's going to inform policy, right? Administrators at these schools, right?
We have
and
a
even
lot at stake right now.
right, and then even the population that we have here, it's like, we know from our communities, from our communities, how challenging answering a census form can be.
Oh my goodness.
You know, and so.
But we're there.
But we're there. We're there.
I know for a fact, Black folks showed up. The 1-something% and 166,000 in the city. We're the largest city in the county. Actually, we know Soledad has the largest Black population based on the census count. 9% Black, mostly due to the prison. I'm sorry to interject. Go ahead.
And then what does that say too, right?
says
Like
a
what
lot.
does that say about the Black population of Monterey County?
It says a lot.
You know, can there, maybe there's something there. Maybe I'm just putting it out there, hopefully.
Well, I think-
But if there can be a census, because census needs a lot of trust.
It needs trust, and I want to say, like this narrative of Fort Ord and there being this Black legacy across, you know, the river and the peninsula, and then for me to come and find out about these Black families, right, who had businesses here in Salinas, and never hearing that, and I'm in these circles and these pockets with the who's of the Black community, and I'm like, how come they ain't repping the Cooper family? How come they ain't repping? And so that's where the lettuce curtain shit starts happening, where what y'all do over there across the river is what y'all do. But what we do over here is what we do. And then we've got Clint Eastwood and all the Carmel. I mean, there's so much division and clicky shit happen. I keep cussing, sorry. But they click up, people click up.
And out of what, right? Based out of what, you know, our experiences, our lived experience, and even the information that we're getting, you know, it's just, it's gonna keep us in our comfort zone, right? And so us as organizers really trying to disrupt as much as, you know, in a safe and healthy and in a good way.
But what you were saying about the census is a tool, but you were.
But if we're to get that count that we need, you know, it needs trust, and the relationships are what fuel that trust. And I say that because we know that there's more black folk in Salinas, right? We know that throughout the county. And why wouldn't it show up in the numbers? Because there's a history, right? There's a history of being, taken into account, right? Or signing in, or what, all of that. Like, it's gone generation by generation by generation. Like, what does this mean? How does this feel in the body, right?
The Historical Society has a document where there were like 8 black families, and then like the next year was 38 black folks, and it's like everybody was having cheerings. Like they're bringing your cousin.
And where were they coming from?
They were coming to pick some of these things, the wheat, if it wasn't the wheat or the lettuce, and then they went on back to Texas, or they went on up to Watsonville to get strawberries, or they went wherever.
And a lot of them were leaving the South too.
Of course.
So, and what was that? That was survival. So I mean, it's.
Oh man.
We are our history, and how much of that is in our DNA. And how much of that is gonna require more of these conversations, more work, more marches, more projects, I mean, wow. Well, we got there's a lot there, and just a shout out to the Filipino community too, because it's
really important.
we all played a part in contributing to what Salinas, the Salinas Valley, this county. Back to being part of that global food chain. It's there.
And as far as a stake in the ground, the Filipino Cultural Center, I don't know how many years they've been in Salinas, but you can see the history on the wall. If you've been there, down the street from my house right there on Calle Cebu. So establishing a location for community, right? Establishing your own government with your own leaders to be able to make, decisions that impact your community. Like I have to honor that. Final thoughts, because I know we're short on time and want to make sure we can get some questions if there are some.
Devon, you were going to say something a couple of times.
It was just back to the census, in that, in just the city of Salinas, we're like 87% Latino. And 76, I think, % of those who filled out the census, Latinos that filled out the census, claim some other race. They're not white, they're not black. There is not an option for them, right? So coming back to, I think it is the trust and it's the education. What is the census? What are you asking me here? Like, I'm not white, I'm not black, I'm mestizo. Most people probably were like, I'm mestizo. You don't have that for me as an option. And yet I still make out more than 3/4 of the people in this city. And so, yeah, I think it is just that visibility. But that too, though, that's just such a subtle reinforcement of white supremacy. It says, you are who we say you are. And I think those are the kind of things that if we can change those things, that's actually, it doesn't seem like a big thing, but that could be a huge thing. So.
We'll have to have the white supremacy panel. Oh, Lord Jesus, get ready for that. Go ahead.
I was just thinking about when Dred first got up here. He was like 10 years old. His mom she actually came up from Texas and started out with Sherwood doing a laundromat thing. And so she was there for a couple of years. She actually escaped from Port Charles, Louisiana, and took her kids and then was trying to build a new life. And got kids up there a couple years later, him and his sister. They moved into Prudale, and that night, the next morning, there was a bunch of guys at the door saying, "Get them ends out of here, and if you don't, we'll get rid of them for you." And that was his welcome to Monterey County. And he was only, not even 10.
10 years old. Well, we want to thank you all. Very rich discussion. I want to thank all my panelists. This was good. I appreciate you all. Again, we want to thank, Wave Street Studios and the crew. Also would be remiss if I didn't thank our grantors, the Monterey County Arts Council, as well as the City of Salinas Public Art Commission. There are a few other organizations I know we all are a part of, but I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge other places for folks that are non-BIPOC that want to get involved. There's Whites for Racial Equity. There's the Monterey County Peace and Justice Center. There's NCBI, National Coalition Building Institute. There's Monterey County Black and Brown Solidarity. There's the National Association of Colored People, right, in Monterey County. Am I missing anything or any other ones you all want to share?
Building Healthy Communities, Black Power Building, and there's Padres Unidos. They're like a parent advocacy group for those wanting to impact the budgets of the school districts in Salinas, and we know that there's efforts in the Peninsula and South Monterey County.
Thank you. Questions? Questions, questions, questions?
Questions, Nick?
You called me out. Yeah, the question is Devon and Xago, or anybody, because it's something that you both said really resonated with me around the budget and general plan. It's like when you involve community in this process that is defined by the institution which you're trying to change, and you do everything that you tell them to, increase the numbers, and basically next to nothing happens, right? Not to say that's not, all our work isn't for nothing, right? But I guess my question is, what is the next step? Is how do you kind of continue to engage those folks who might feel, discouraged by that? And I guess the larger question is like, in terms of like organizing, it's like, okay, we got to escalate, right? We did the petitions, we did the listening sessions, now we got to disrupt more, right? And in order to do that, we should organize more. But at the same time, it's like, are we kind of organizing to shift these institutions that really don't give a shit about what we think? Or is it like what Asia was saying, like put your stake in the ground, build your own like organization for self-governance, or is this about a false dichotomy? How do you do both? It's a lot of questions in one, I'm sorry. But
Good question.
Can you repeat it? Because I want to make sure that we can hear it.
Okay.
So this is the summary of
That was a lot to repeat.
Yeah.
But Nick was sharing, when you work with local governments and you have the community engagement piece and people still aren't seeing the results, like do you continue to disrupt, or do you instead work with your collective groups and just try to have your own local governance and put your stake in the ground? Like, so is the question is, what do you do when that community organizing and you don't see the progress on the budget? Is that about right?
Yeah, that's a great reason.
Okay.
The lesson out of this year was, okay, first, let's make sure that the avenues for that participation are clear and open for residents, like monolingual Spanish speakers who are farm workers, right? Who can't participate at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, right?
Where's that?
Making sure that there's going to be a Zoom, because a lot of the advocacy that our folks got to do, push to help get that Zoom, and then get that Zoom translated, right?
Still work needs to be done.
Still some work needs to be done, but then also to make sure that those agendas are translated, and then also make sure that the budget gets translated, because the budget didn't get translated. These are a lot of documents, and so in the 149 years that Salinas has been around, it's like, wow, you're coming to understand that the success of a democratic, process is dependent upon getting the majority of these folks who don't participate to participate, right?
Yeah.
And that's just, that's just that piece, So it's like making sure that that's in place. And when we're in there, it's like, okay, they're going to tell us, well, this is the budget, like they told us. The residents are going to ask, well, wait a minute, wait a minute, how did our participation, it doesn't look like nothing changed. What? And then they respond with, well, oh no, there's actually more money coming in from these other budgets. So that's not the only thing you're seeing. Okay, then we need that transparency.
But I've got to pepper in. I have to put some pepper in this with the whole defund the police business. I would be remiss to not mention all of the defund movement, right? And you heard me going OFF how much more money has been allocated for law enforcement. So then we say, going back to what you're saying, so there's not money for this, there's the education, all of this cut, but we need the police. But you got people around the world, no more money for the police, but you know what we see? We see new cars, we see technology, we see the shortage, and it's kind of reworded and reframed, and we have residents who come to city council. I sat there and heard that woman say, whatever you do, make sure the police get their money. And it's like, you know how much money? And so we sit there, and then you have people who want to feel safe because, well, there's not enough police on the street. So we need to make sure. So I'd be remiss to not put that factor into when we look at budgets and we look at, there's this whole other conversation that's not happening when it comes to public safety, right?
And it brings me back to that James Baldwin quote, you know, if my danger makes you feel safe, then we're all in trouble.
Say it again slow.
If my danger makes you feel safe, then we're all in trouble. Paraphrase, right? So.
He also addressed it to you, Devon, too.
No, and I would say, I would say that. And I think it is, I think that you kind of brought it home, though, really, because that is the crux of the issue, right? Like, we capitalize on white fear, right? And so we just keep the system running on white fear. And what we do is, in order for white fear to be in place, then we have to sacrifice brown bodies.
Say it again slow.
I can't remember what I just said.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
In order to keep white fear in place, we have to sacrifice brown bodies. And until we can recognize that, we are just going to keep feeling like we're on that hamster wheel, right? Because that's what it feels like. It feels like we're running in place. It feels like we're not getting anywhere. And I think it's fits and starts, and it's backpedaling, and then it's incremental movement. And I think we just hope that if we can be consistent, that over time we'll see the change. We have to do it all with hope.
Keep hope alive.
Yeah.
That was Jesse Jackson.
Yeah.
You mentioned protecting or the black and brown bodies in being run over, and that's kind of one of those things that led me toward working for people too poor to afford rent. Because that's actually all this wealth inequality is. Well, we ain't got the money for this, but we got plenty of money to get rid of you. No money for housing, but and that goes back to the slave catcher, Pinkerton, security, either or, either sworn peace officer or not. Those guys are just gun-toting like big ranch, murderers. How to get my ranch so big? Well, I killed all my neighbors, and just stole all the wealth and not going to share. And that, and then we say, well, we're Christians and we're going to care and we're going to share, but no, we don't. When is that ever going to change? And
we
you want
don't
to talk
get
about
that
some
Bible
mighty-whitey
out,
stuff, my folks are religious to some degree, so I'm Baptist or Catholic, either way, I'm kind of trapped in it. And so I've been exposed to an awful lot of it. My last name is White, so, I can't escape it if I tried, So I like using that privilege to hopefully, put that in the right perspective and shift it, because it's not just about, they got to feel ashamed. They have to actually, what impact is it happening to the administration, to the electeds? Because so what? They'll get elected again unless you have an organized homeless voting bloc or any sense of solidarity going on. Then you have to have solidarity between these groups, and we all have to understand like if we don't support and to me this is the lowest rung, are people too poor to afford rent? If they could have an address, then guess what? 30-50% of the police officer's job would be gone, because he wouldn't be able to say you can't be here and take everything you got. And I'd say that's a Native American experience, it's a black experience, it's any person of color experience.
Well said. Well said. Thank you. Any other questions before we go ahead?
Just one quick question, just when you had mentioned.
Speak up too so they can hear you.
Yeah, just a quick question in regards to the Juneteenth celebration, when you had reached out for the land acknowledgement. I'm just curious to know, what was the experience then about how you all decided as a collective, well, what is the best way? We've received this perspective, from this leader, and so how do we go about it doing, the best what we have to do in this space? What was the decision that was made, and how did you come upon that? And I'm just curious about that, yeah.
I think MPC, because Dr. Kendra works at MPC, they had done a land acknowledgement through the university, a formal process. So we were thinking to have a Hartnell representative do that, but Hartnell had not completed its land acknowledgement. So then we said, well, we still want to honor the land. We had reached out to a cadre of different folks who we were told by word of mouth were the people to reach out to, but we weren't getting a response. So then I know his work that he's been doing with different groups here. And I was forewarned, like, well, if you invite one, you better invite all of them. So it was already like the seeds were planted, the breadcrumbs were laid. You be careful when you start this. So after we had that conversation with her, we thanked her humbly. And then I had to like be quiet for a while. And then Dr. Kendra decided to, she asked her, well, what shall I say? So she kind of dictated the Rumsfeld, the Brickleberry, like the languages that they spoke.
The ensign being the land of the blackberry brambles.
Blackberry brambles, yes. Yes, so she gave us the language to use to honor that legacy. And so it was like verbatim, and she wrote it down, and she read it from her phone that day, So that was, and again, another lesson. Great question. Go ahead, you want to
And I think
add?
an opportunity to provide a true, a sincere land acknowledgement, because I think we have a lot of canned land acknowledgements happening. A lot of the same verbiage, a lot of people looking like me, reading a couple of academic papers, and then looking at the whose land am I on website, and going like, okay, this is the land of, and we're grateful to these, and whereas this is like, okay, we did our research, we talked to people, this is what we learned, this is where you are, this is who you are to thank for this.
And the
opportunity.
conversation that we were having too is like, even when they do this spiel and they're reading the whole thing, I don't know how many thousands of people, going back to what you're sharing about how many scalps, how many folks were here in this area that I'm standing right now. What did they do? How were they incorporated, and what was their life like? I don't want just this is the land of the Ohlone and Esalen, check. Tell me more, so.
And we were also able to speak to the transience of people in this area, like they didn't live lives the way we live. They didn't, go like, I'm going to build a house here and I'm going to live in it for 70 years. Like, no, we're going to, the fish are here right now, so this is where we're going to be, and then, it's.
Well, you start with that fish.
I know.
They said time was up. You start with the fisheries, Lord G, right here, down the street.
In accordance with nature.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Following nature's
Yes.
laws,
Yeah.
which are a violation of men's laws.
Because everybody got to eat. Yes. All right, folks, thank you so much. It's been real. Until next time.
Thank you.
This was good. Thank you all. Thank you all. Good, good, good. That was good.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my God.